And welcome back into another edition of Oh Mama, a look back at the 2008 Steel Curtain defense. We've been lucky enough to be joined by such luminaries as Dick LeBeau. We've caught up with Bryant McFadden. And today, we're lucky enough to get Detroit Pershing's own Larry Foote, current co-defensive coordinator for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, a Big Ten Defensive Player of the Year in 2001, a first-team All-American in 2001, a two-time Super Bowl champ as a player, of course, with your Pittsburgh Steelers, and another ring as a coach. Larry, thanks for making the time. We appreciate you doing this.
Oh, man, thanks for having me. You know, Pittsburgh is home, and it will always be home.
Well, you made a stamp right from the start, and I want to get to that first full year as a starter in a second because you came in as part of a special group. But I'm just curious. I mentioned Detroit Pershing right off the top. I think something that a lot of fans remember you for, whether it's because they're Steeler fans or they're just football fans in general, you were one of the first guys to shout your high school during those primetime intros. And instead of Larry Foote, Michigan Wolverines, we got Larry Foote, Detroit Pershing Doughboys. And I'm just curious, what was it that popped into your head that made you say, you know what? I love Detroit so much. I love my high school so much. I'm going to shout Pershing during this primetime Monday Night Football intro or whatever it was, Sunday night, instead of shouting out Michigan.
Well, like you said, I love my high school and my neighborhood. It wasn't a shot at Michigan, but Michigan is known worldwide. And when I had the opportunity to be on that big stage on Monday night or Sunday night, I just wanted to show my neighborhood, my high school. I knew that would mean so much to those, you know, that from my neighborhood and went to my high school. And I thought it was a cool gesture. It wasn't a shot at Michigan. I am definitely proud to be a Michigan Wolverine. I got a lot of hate mail from that, but it wasn't no shot at Michigan. But Michigan is already one of the with all time winningest program in college football. I got to remind people that from time to time. But I just thought it was real cool to give a shout out to my hometown and my neighborhood and my high school. And, you know, Detroit guys, we got pride in our city. You know, Bettis. You never caught Bettis without his Detroit hat on.
No.
And if you're from Detroit, we're all the same. We got a lot of pride in Detroit.
Well, and the reason I said you came in as part of a special group is because you came in 2002 draft, 4th round, during a time where, let's be honest, your time during the Steelers was filled with transition from one coach to another, from one set of players to another. When you come in 2002, it's kind of during that weird period where Coach Cowher was finding his footing again. Tom Donahoe had left, and there was still a lot of flux at the quarterback position. You become a full-time starter in 2004, the first time you shout out Pershing in primetime. And 2005 is the year where really Larry Foote becomes the dude. Over 100 tackles, playing inside every single week, week in, week out, 3 sacks and 16 starts as well. And that's when you guys go off to Detroit and you win the Super Bowl for Jerome Bettis, for Coach Cowher, Super Bowl 40. I kind of look at that team, even though there were some changes that we'll get to in a second between the Super Bowl 40 and Super Bowl 43 team that we're here to talk about. The Super Bowl 40 team, and BMAC mentioned this as well, kind of laid a foundation for the way things were going to run for the next few years, despite all that transition I mentioned. How did you guys lay that foundation, and how did you continue to find consistency with all the change that was going on around you?
Well, at first it starts with Kevin Colbert. You know, he drafted well. And speaking of that 2002 class, we're still mentioned as one of his best class or not the best class he ever drafted. And he did a tremendous job bringing in guys, not just good football players, but quality men and guys who fit the locker room, guys who got along well, and from all different types of background. And I thought that was very unique. I was fortunate and to be in a locker room, and those guys are my best friends to this day. But he did a great job. He brought in quality guys, and we gelled right. And we was fortunate. We won a lot. A lot of guys, you know, that core, we stayed together for a long time. You don't see that a lot of times in the NFL, and it just
Right.
speaks to Kevin Colbert and his staff. Them guys drafted well, and ultimately we got 2 Super Bowls out of it.
I mean, who else? Kendall Simmons, Antoine
Randall,
Randall. Yep.
Chris Hope, Chris Hope. Those 2
Okay.
guys left. They didn't get the second one. I remind them guys all the time that I got 2. But those guys left. Big money, free agency. It did pluck some of our good players. James Harrison was actually in that class. He wasn't drafted, but he's a free agent.
That's true. That's true.
He was a free agent. Brett Kiesel. Think about that. You find that type of talent in the 6th round or 5th round. But he did it. He did an awesome job. But I give a lot of credit to Kevin Colbert. Well, he started it. He's the godfather.
Well, you mentioned the character of the guys that he brought in, and you just rattled off the list of names. And I think most Steeler fans will remember those guys as of a certain character, right? Of a certain stand-up nature. Is that what started to gel you guys and bring you together as sort of that familial type atmosphere? You mentioned the locker room atmosphere.
Well, when I step, and I tell people this all the time, when I step foot in the locker room, it was already set. The foundation was set. Guys like Joey Porter, Jerome Bettis, Hines Ward, those guys already laid the foundation. So when I walked in there, I tell people, I remember the first day, like Joey Porter handed me a towel. And, he's the star on the team. He's the captain. And even the last man on the 53, even every practice squad guys was welcome over Joey's house, Bettis' house. And it was a family atmosphere, and they laid the foundation. The superstars. As soon as you walk in there, they were the most humblest people, and they were warm, and they embraced everybody. So the family atmosphere was set. The ego was left at the door. It's about the team, and I'm coming as a hot shot, All-American, Big Ten Defense Player of the Year, and I had to leave that at the door, and it was the team first.
So let's talk about some of the transition that starts to happen now. You guys win Super Bowl 40, but that offseason, it kind of starts because Joey Porter moves on. I want to say the following offseason is when we get Coach Cowher retiring. Mike Tomlin comes in. Yeah. You also get Ryan Clark added to the mix as a free agent, I believe, at that point. James Harrison becomes a full-time starter at that point after sitting behind Peasy for a couple of years. What's it like that first year under Mike Tomlin, and how did he, I asked Dick LeBeau, Coach LeBeau, what the conversation was like between he and Mike Tomlin when Mike Tomlin was hired. How did Mike Tomlin tell him it was still going to be his defense? And he said, it wasn't really much of a conversation, to be honest. He just called me up one day and we started talking ball. What was it like when Mike Tomlin came in? How did he try and set a tone, or I guess take what you guys have been successful with to that point and meld his own ways with it?
Well, we were geeked up initially because he was so young. He's a black coach, a young coach. I think he was about 31. Yeah. Him and Ferry played against each other in college. So we thought the world of that. We were so pumped up, and we were excited. Just just a new beginning, and we was excited about his future. And all of a sudden, when training camp hit around, and we didn't like Mike Tomlin that much. He changed up a lot of things that we were fond of and that we loved doing in training camp, and he mixed it up. And just far as I remember having two-a-days and hitting in the morning. With Cowher, my previous 6 years, we never hit in the AM. It was always in the afternoon. Mm-hmm. So guys, in training camp, we stayed up all night. We knew the morning was just going to be a little walkthrough, a little easy practice. So we stayed up, playing cards and video games and whatnot. And here comes young Mike Tomlin, who we were excited for, we loved, and he had us put on the pads in the AM. So that right there, we started hating Mike Tomlin. We hated him, and he was doing it just in spite. He was going opposite just because he knew we liked certain days or certain things, and he just he did his own thing. He was trying to break us from the old ways, and we didn't appreciate us old grizzly guys, veteran. We didn't like that.
So after that first season with him at the helm, you guys lose a tough one to Jacksonville in the playoffs. Yep. And you come back the following summer And now we're talking about, Lawrence Timmons has been drafted. Lamar Woodley has been drafted. B-Mac and Willie Gay have all been brought into the fold in the ensuing years. And so we start to get multiple spots where there's this passing of the torch that's happening, right? Like from you to Timmons, for example, or from Clark Hagens to Lamar Woodley, or Deshae maybe to B-Mac or Willie Gay. How did you guys, did you talk about it at all with each other, being the grizzled veterans that you talked about? Did you say, hey, we got to help bring these guys along? Did it just come naturally to you? How did you guys, especially you, Clark, and Deshae in particular, handle yet another transition like that?
We embraced it. I told you earlier, the foundation was set. We were family. We was in that locker room, all hands on deck. We just, what the old heads taught us, we passed it down. So we embraced those guys. Even with Timmons, I'm trying to hold this young first rounder stud off and taking my spot. So we sharing reps. Me, him, and Ferrier, we had like a little rotation. But we loved each other. It was all about winning. It was always about winning. You had to put your ego to the side, even your career for the most part. And it was all about getting that ring. We already tasted Super Bowls, so I wanted that feeling again. So I had no problem with sharing the spotlight. And we all embraced that. And that was the mindset in that locker room.
So 2008, you guys get through camp and you start off hot. I want to say 4-1, 5-1. You're giving up like 14 points a game, out to a 6-3 start, leading the division. And then somehow you guys take it to another level. The last 7 games of the season, I want to say it is, you go 6-1. You give up a total of 83 points, so less than 12 points a game. And you're just shutting down everybody. I think there was one blip on the radar against Tennessee, which a lot of people, especially Steeler fans, may remember as the Keith Bullock stomping on the towel game.
Right.
So what do you remember about that regular season? You talk about bringing the young guys along. It's Mike Tomlin's second full year. Maybe he had learned some things. Maybe you guys had learned to communicate with him better. Just what's the feeling that year as you're progressing towards an AFC North championship?
Well, I remember just going into that year, he kind of broke us down a little bit the first year, and he said his reason, and we all respected that. We love Mike Tomlin. But, it had to be his way. And, 08, he kind of gave back. He gave a little bit to the older guys. The previous year, we kind of, we limped into the playoffs a little bit. But we met each other in the middle. And I remember the Lamar Woodley and James Harrison, they really turned it up. They turned into the most dominant outside linebacker duo probably in the league, and one of the best to this day. And I just remember that year they were dominating. That year I remember because we always would tit for tat, the front 7 guys versus the back end guys. We always mess around with each other. But those guys took a major leap. And for us to have those historic numbers, those guys was number 1 in the passing. And I think that might have been our first time them being that dominant on the back end. And that had a lot to do with Lamar Woodley and James Harrison, of course. I just remember we were unstoppable. Like, people couldn't throw the ball. They couldn't do nothing on us. And it was amazing. I always look back. I always throw that team up with all the greats. I know we don't never get mentioned because the Steelers always been known for it. But if you look at those numbers, and who we had to play. I remember going into that season, we had the toughest schedule in the history, I think, in football. And for us to play that type of those type of opponents and dominate them like that, that just speaks to all hands on deck. We had the greatest defense coordinator ever leading the charge. And it was, I just remember they couldn't block Lamar Woodley and James Harrison. And it was something to see. I remember we could play 2 high safeties. It didn't matter because you couldn't run the ball on us. Even we had a light box because we had Casey Hampton, Aaron Smith, Brett Keisel. So, I mean, it was teams would beat before we even got off the bus.
Yeah, when I was talking to Coach LeBeau about just, coming up as a young ball player and then as a young, inexperienced coach, he talked about just the realization he had early on as a player. from watching the game where he was on the field on the back end, like you're talking about, that, creating pressure could create chaos and could cause offenses to crumble. And that's exactly what you're talking about here is Woodley and Harrison drive the bus that year because they create the opportunity for guys to make plays on the back end. I think you had 17 turnovers in the last 7 games, something crazy like that. Was that opportunistic style that you guys had to cause turnovers like that? Was that talked about? Was that just the natural way you guys played football, especially under Coach LeBeau?
Well, it starts up front. I always look at those guys up front, and I just mentioned it earlier. We had like a shell defense, like a cover 2 defense, or say a cover 4 defense, where we didn't have that extra guy, so we would protect versus a big pass. But you should have ran it on us. It'd have had a better chance of being effective against us. Mm-hmm. But our front guys, let's just say everybody 2 gaps. So Casey Hampton had 2 gaps. Aaron Smith had 2 gaps. So now that was able to keep Troy and Ryan Clark in the back. And we were just dominating. We're stopping your run game and hitting your quarterback with light men in the box. And when you can do that, I mean, it's pretty, I don't care what, you can't do nothing against that.
Yeah.
And that's how dominant those guys were up front. That was enable us to play that type of defense. And of course, we had to mix it up and play that game. But you had to prepare for us. You had to figure out how to physically beat us first. And a lot of teams, they couldn't match up, no matter what they tried.
When you guys get to the playoffs now, you're flying high. Defenses performed really well all year. I mentioned the one blip on the radar against Tennessee, but you bounced back in the final week and shut out Cleveland. I think 31-0 it was. Just utter domination. You get the Chargers in the first round at home. There's a little bit of fight back that has to happen in that game because you're down by 10, I want to say. And then I want to say the offense scored on the last drive of the first half, first drive of the second half, and from there, you kind of took control. But you get to the AFC Championship game, and it's the old AFC North rivals, the Baltimore Ravens coming in. And you jump out to the early 13-0 lead, which in a game like that, I mean, the AFC North is still this way. You jump out to a 13-0 lead, it might as well be a 28-0 lead for any other game in the NFL. But the Ravens clawed back. I want to say it's 16-14. There's like 9.5 minutes left. And they get the ball back, and it's clicking down like 8 minutes, 7 minutes. And when they get it back, that moment that happens at Heinz Field, they can call it Acrisure Stadium now if they want, that happens in those big moments. Oh, mama, I'm in fear of my life. And the whole place goes bananas. It goes ape. I mean, Coach LeBeau told me he knew in those situations, he didn't even have to say anything to you guys. He just let the scoreboard do the job.
Man, when we watched that interception at Troy, you're speaking of that drive, and till this day, when you watch it, on your system, you think something wrong with your TV or your internet. And that's only time ever where the stadium was literally shaking the whole time. And when we watch film, that's the coolest thing. I love looking at that clip. And that just speaks to Pittsburgh. And they were definitely the true 12th man. And but I love watching that clip. And it was a sight to see. And for him to score and how long that film was rocking. Yeah, and it's awesome. I think they need to show that one time on TV, a network, and it's just amazing how that place literally was shaped.
So that they play Renegade. 5 plays later, Troy picks off Flacco, and Coach LeBeau admitted to me he had Troy in man coverage on Todd Heap, I think it was, and Heap stayed in the backfield. And Coach LeBeau admitted he's sitting on the sideline thinking to himself, "Oh my God, I'm going to have Troy sitting there shadowing a guy in the backfield. And this is the most impactful safety in the game. I can't believe it." But Troy knew exactly what to do because he'd studied and he read Flacco's eyes, jumped the slant, picked it off, takes it back. And then I think I don't want to say people forget because they don't forget the moment, but it's only 2-3 plays later after Baltimore gets the ball back after the kickoff that we have the Ryan Clark, Willis McGahee collision. Right. That happened after the Troy pick. What's your reaction when that happens?
Well, that was scary. You know, you kind of, especially watching the game last night, you get out of that moment. You just worrying about the well-being because both of those guys were knocked out, and that's a scary moment. I don't care what part of the game, be preseason, regular season, a big rivalry. We were just concerned about those guys' safety. Health. So when they got up, you know, we got back in that moment, and you know, you didn't need the AFC Championship game. You knew the Ravens and Steelers got together. It was going to be a sight to see, and I'm glad that both those guys got up and were okay. But that moment was, you know, I'm going to cherish that forever at Heinz Field.
Have you seen since then in any of your roles, player or coach? Have you seen a game of that magnitude with that level of physicality?
No, I haven't seen it. Being in the NFC South, when we play, and I'm just coaching, we play the Saints, I get that same vibe, just a natural, a love, respect, but a hatred towards one another. When I was in Arizona, I didn't really pick up on none of that, but that's the closest thing since being a coach is us versus the Saints, especially these last few years. But nothing, you know, I was fortunate to go to Michigan, Ohio State, so it's on that same level with the Ravens because we're so much alike, and we pretty much knew whoever won that division was going to the playoffs. And but speaking of that game, that's why I don't care what the record is. We always be one ahead of them. We beat them to go to the Super Bowl. So until they do that, I don't care if they win 20 regular season games. Until you beat us in the AFC Championship to go to the Super Bowl, we always be on top of that rivalry, and that's just, you know, the way I see
it. That's fair. I think a lot of Steeler fans will agree with you on that account, Larry. Super Bowl 43. Then 2 weeks later, you're out in Arizona. And this is not the 2000 Ravens offense you're facing. You are facing a Hall of Fame quarterback in Kurt Warner, Hall of Fame wide receiver in Larry Fitzgerald, borderline Hall of Fame receiver in Anquan Bolden. Steve Breston had 1,000 yards that year. Edgerrin James is on the backside of his career, but he's still there and he's still productive. What's your mindset as a defense going into that game? And how did the experience of Super Bowl 40 3 years prior to it help kind of pave the road for you guys?
We were so dominant, and I don't you call it swag. It didn't matter because we ain't never gonna overlook nobody, but we just knew we was gonna win. We knew we was gonna dominate them. I just remember me and Casey Hampton because we would come out in a lot of passing situations, and they ran the ball. I remember they was down. They got to the Super Bowl by running the ball. So me and Casey was like, okay, cool. We're gonna play a more physical game, our style. And all of a sudden, by midway through the first quarter, we knew, like, yeah, they're not going to try to run that ball on us. I don't care how they got there. They knew better. And but it was a great game. We knew a lot of those guys, Wisenhunt. So it was a lot of ex-Steelers on that sideline. Clark Hagan was actually with them then. He was on IR, but we hung out with him that week. So, for 3 quarters, we knew we were Super Bowl champs. For 3 quarters, we was already sizing up our range. Then Larry Fitzgerald put on his little cape and made stuff a little hard for us.
Well, let's hold before we get to Larry Fitz and the big play to give everybody a scare.
Right.
Let's go back to the pick 6, James Harrison. Okay. We all know. I think most Steeler fans know the story by now. He was supposed to blitz. He didn't blitz. Coach LeBeau told me that when he asked him about it right afterwards, James told him, well, everybody else, I knew you were sending the house, so I didn't have to go because we were on the 1 yard line, 2 yard line, whatever it was. I knew I could sit and read Warner's eyes, so he did, picks it off. As he's starting to run back, are you thinking to yourself, man, just go down, James, just go down? Or are you thinking to yourself, no, take it, big boy, take it?
Definitely when he got to field goal range, it was kind of like, get down, get out of bounds, so we can kick a long field goal and take 3 before the half ended. But to give you another backdrop about that story, that was a defense that we played down there in the red zone. So that was a defense we would play all out. It'd be a peel blitz. He's supposed to rush and grab the running back. And I remember he did that a few times, and him and Keith Butler, our linebacker coach at the time, they would have a little disagreement. And Harrison, thank God, being as stubborn as he is, he kind of, I got this, don't worry about it. So it's one of those back and forth, they're yelling at each other, just do your job, don't worry about it, I got it. So I like to say I'm glad that he didn't listen to Keith Butler and play by the book. And he read his eyes and made one of the greatest plays in football history.
I mean, it's just watching him. And then, I went back and watched the game several times, obviously, in preparation for this. And the thing that always gets me is how long that delay was while they looked at the replay to make sure that he actually got in. And he's sucking down oxygen the whole time. And I don't remember who the halftime show was that year, but I can imagine just the halftime show sitting there to set up, because you know how it is. They're all just kind of waiting in the wings to run out there, put the stage up. And then all of a sudden, I mean, to have that, talk about turning points and momentum in a game, that's as big as it gets until, let's go back now, Larry Foote catches that big play and 64 yards, he's gone, he's to the house. How did you guys react when you saw that happen?
We were shook. That was the first time, that's a legendary defense. And that was the first time we actually really got hit in the mouth. And that whole fourth quarter, we didn't play our brand of ball, and they made plays. I don't want to say what we did. They made plays. They beat us. And, it was Hall of Fame. The Hall of Fame thrown into another Hall of Famer. Mm-hmm. So they made plays. And it was all fitting because, that defense, we got a lot of the publicity, rightfully so. But it makes it awesome that our offense, who was kind of, they had to take a back seat to us. And just an ultimate team game. Ben had to come and save the day in that whole offense. And they were kind of they were getting shut out in the second half also. Arizona completely had the momentum until that last drive. And we know the history of that. Ben goes all the way down in San Antonio. Holmes made an awesome play.
So I've asked a couple different people this. They've each given me a different answer. I'll ask you. Okay. Ben rolls out, scrambles a bit, makes the throw to the back of the end zone. Santonio goes up and grabs it. What's your viewpoint of it? Are you watching the score, looking up at the board? Are you trying to catch a field level view? Because it's all the way down in probably the opposite corner, right? And do you know, as soon as he catches that ball, do you go, oh, Tone got his toes down? Or do you go, oh, I hope he got his toes down?
Well, anytime they reviewing, you just got your fingers crossed. I remember early in that game, we thought we scored and they didn't give it to us. I remember our first Super Bowl is one of those close ones that they did give it to us. But at that moment, we're just hoping and praying. And when they told us it just went crazy, then we had to lock back in because they had enough time to take a shot at the end zone.
Yeah, and Woodley gets the strip and the sack, and that kind of puts it to bed, and you get your second ring. When you look back on that game, that postseason, the Cardinals game, the Ravens game, that year as a whole, like I said, the loss down in Tennessee that might have reignited you guys a little bit, especially it reignited the fans anyway with the towel stomp and all that. What do you remember about, because you used the word character earlier, and I think that's the word to describe this defense. What do you remember about the character of down to every single last guy on that defense, of how you responded in moments of adversity?
You hear it all the time. It's most cliche quote in sports when people just say we were a family. And I argue when I hear that because I know we were a family. And we loved each other. We was a brotherhood. Said that earlier. It wasn't no egos. It wasn't no I. It was always about the team. But we legitimately loved each other. I'm quite sure B-Mac and we never wanted to be apart. And that was so special. The time I got to go get drafted there and that little core we had, I remember. And I try to instill that in my players today, like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. I know we were all young. We wasn't married yet. But we stayed together. We were playing cards or we're going to dinner or playing video games. I remember in the off season, we couldn't wait to go to somebody's hometown to do the camp. And training camp, we stay up to 4 a.m. Some of the Super Bowl stories. I know McFadden, them guys was up to 6 a.m, didn't go to bed, playing cards, but we legitimately love being around each other. Even when we get together now, it's just like yesterday. But we were definitely a family. And I just think in some way how it's set up, God rewards those type of teams. Just that brotherhood, that camaraderie. It was real. It was legit. And like I said, it was guys from all types of different backgrounds, but we legitimately loved each other. We were a family. And that's why we were so strong.
I know
We
you
could
said
always rise.
you try to instill that in your guys now. Do you see that? And I'm not even just with your team specifically,
Right.
but do you see that around the league now, or does it feel like we're slowly getting to a point where guys are more and more detached from each other as
Detached.
soon?
Oh, the social media aspect. I
Yeah.
ask them all the time, on a Friday night or a Monday night. We always were together Monday night. We watch film. That was the thing. We take home the DVDs, which, these players don't even know what that is. But that was it. Monday nights, Thursday nights was you couldn't miss. We got massages, watch film together on Thursday. We was always together playing cards or doing anything. And I was asking, like, what you guys do? And I get so mad at them. I try to encourage them. I want you guys go to dinner. And I just believe that's that little, that little inch that you need, that little it factor. And I think it also helps when you're a family, you hold each other accountable. When we're not that tight, you're afraid to step on people's toes. And that's the part where it's so different. I knew why we was different. I knew what would set us apart because we called each other out. We were ruthless. Just picture your brother. You wouldn't hesitate to tell your brother something. You even make something up to get him going. And it was no holds barred when it came to that. And oftentimes the refs that some of the refs that still remember me from my playing days, they would share stories about they would have to ask each other, are we supposed to throw a flag on them the way they treat each other in the huddle? Like you will hear some stuff, some of those heated games, boy, I tell you, it will be like never before. But that's what got us going. And it's just like, I would beat my brother up, just me, not my neighbor, not the guy down the street. And I think when you're a family, you can hold each other accountable. So if you're not doing your job or holding your weight, we didn't hesitate to tell you. And I see that now in these locker rooms and the teams I've been on, like, why y'all not checking each other? Yeah. And I'm not saying go blow to blow, but, if it comes to that, we wasn't, I just seen a few fights amongst each other, but it was all out of just trying to push each other and make each other better.
So you mentioned numbers earlier, and I know Dick LeBeau, Coach LeBeau was a numbers guy, and I ran some numbers because I was curious. Steeler fans love to compare eras. It's impossible not to when you have the great teams of the 70s. You got the Super Bowl teams of the 2000s that you were a part of. And so I checked it. There are 4 Pittsburgh Steelers teams, Larry, in the history of the franchise. 4 years where the defense was ranked first in the league in both yards against and points against. Only one of them came in the 70s. It was 1976. It actually wasn't even a Super Bowl championship team. They lost because of injuries. Franco Harris, Rocky Bleier couldn't play the AFC championship game. 3 of those teams came under Coach LeBeau. 2004, 2008, the team we're talking about here today, and 2011. I believe you were a part of all 3 of those, weren't you?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes, I was.
Because you came back after your year away in Detroit.
Yep.
What does it mean to you? I mean, again, the Pittsburgh Steelers are known for, and the legend of the Pittsburgh Steelers has been built on, even for younger generations. Oh, the Steel Curtain of the 70s, and Mean Joe Green, and Chuck Noll, and all that. Mel Blount, Jack Lambert, Jack Ham. But what does it mean to you to be a part of 3 of the 4 defenses in franchise history that were ranked that highly? And you won a Super Bowl with one of those defenses, and we're 15-1 with another one, and won a Super Bowl the following year. What does that mean to you to be amongst what a lot of people can statistically say are 3 of the greatest Steeler defenses in franchise history?
Well, those guys in the 70s started it. They laid the blueprint, they laid the foundation, they laid the culture, the mindset. When you step foot in Pittsburgh, the fans laid, that's just the nature when you go into that city. And I laugh now because I do the coach talk. Let's be top 10. Let's be top 5. No, when we was there, it was number 1. Period. And that was our mindset. Like you was 4 or 3 or 2 or that wasn't acceptable. And Dick LeBeau was with the numbers. He had us brainwashed. It's kind of like he hypnotized us. Like 17 points. That's it. That was the benchmark. They don't score over 17. We'll be in every game. And I forgot the yards per carry, like 3 point something. I forgot. But he had, and every Monday he talked about where we were at. If we was in 3rd, we need to pick it up. And he hypnotized us on it. Like we had to be number 1. And I remember some of the games that we'll be up a lot of points. No, it wasn't no backups going in there. And it was like end of the half. I remember where some teams would take a knee, but if a team didn't take a knee, we would challenge you, hey, don't let them get a draw or run play and get yards. And we would check stats going into that game. Hey, we can't give up 50. Can't give up 60 yards. And we was just, that's how we was wired. And it started up top with Dick LeBeau. Like he wanted us to know where we at, and we wanted to be number 1. And we walked around like that. We watched games and rooted for other defenses to give up points or yards so we can have that slot. And that's how we played. And a lot of games at the end of the year, and we ran out there, and we had the mindset, even if we had playoffs or division on lock, we was fighting against another defense because we wanted that number 1 spot. And he hypnotized us like that. We wanted it.
Before I let you run, I got to ask, how much of what Coach LeBeau did when you were playing for him do you take with you now?
Oh, everything. I was fortunate. I told somebody this the other day on the radio. When I do run the show, my success will be by the great minds I've been around. Because that's who I am. That's really my resume. When I go in and say, look, I've been around Dick LeBeau, Ty Bowles, Bill Cowher, and that's who I am. And so I learned so much from them. What I really take from him, I'm going to try to duplicate, I ain't going to get nowhere close, is just how cool he was. He was cooler than the other side of the pillow. Dick LeBeau, I ain't never see him freak out, ever. Like, he was just so smooth, and we fed off him. I remember, I still look at the coaches, I still get there 2 hours before the game. Dick LeBeau came in there with the players 2 hours before the game. He didn't have a script. He always looking up to the sky. He was late getting that call in sometimes. A lot of DBs gave me some choice words looking for a call, but Dick LeBeau was cool, and we fed off him. And when we got a little out of control, he'll huddle us up. He had to break up some fights on the sideline, and he listened to us. He tell us all the time. My main thing was to get out you guys' way and let you guys play, but Dick LeBeau was special, and he was cool.
Did you start reciting the night before Christmas for the guys yet?
I wish I could, but I got about 10 of them on my phones. I got about 10 of them. A couple of years back when we was on Zoom and lockdown during COVID, all the old guys got together, all our families, and he did it. And he ain't lost a beat. He ain't lost. He said he messes up every time, but he said you will never be able to catch
it. Larry, thank you so much for the time. I can't believe it's been 15 years since you guys went on that run to Super Bowl 43, but it was great to catch up with you, man. I really do appreciate the time.
Oh, man, thanks for having me. And
Larry Foote, one of the great leaders of that 2008 Super Bowl 43 defense that we're here talking about, and of course the Super Bowl 2005 defense as well that won in his hometown of Detroit. Great to catch up with him and kind of get caught up on his perspective too and what it's like to coach players now as compared to what it was like to be a player back then. 15 years, how much transition and change has happened, not just in average everyday life, but the way football players approach the game, even at the highest levels as well. Thanks again to South Hills Kia for presenting the latest episode of Oh Momma, a look back at the 2008 Steel Curtain defense. Next week's episode, we get another unsung hero of those Super Bowl 40 and Super Bowl 43 teams, a guy who was an undrafted free agent, worked, scratched, fought, clawed his way up through the practice squad and game day inactive lists to finally take a huge step at the age of 28 when the guy in front of him on the depth chart was out for about 3 months. Chris Hoke joins us next week right here on Oh Mama, a look back at the 2008 Steel Curtain defense, brought to you by South Hills Kia.